Hello, my name is Andy, and I am the Village Idiot, and I'm armed with a car and a GoPro, and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. You know when you step foot into a place for the very first time, you don't really know what to expect? That's kind of how I feel with this village. I've just come from Eton in the East Riding of Yorkshire, and I've come to the south to film the next parish. And the first thing that I noticed in this place was the amount of great big massive houses. This one's going to be quite good. This is Cherry Burton. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like, and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Cherry Burton is a village and civil parish in the East Riding of Yorkshire, approximately 3 miles northwest of the market town of Beverley, 9 miles east of Market Wheaton, and 11 miles southwest of Driffield. The village lies on the eastern edge of the Yorkshire Wolds and lies to the west of the B1248 road. The civil parish is formed by the village of Cherry Burton and the hamlets of Gardham and High Gardham. According to the 2011 UK census, Cherry Burton Parish had a population of 1,392, a reduction on the 2001 census figure of 1,473. It's seen lots of development within the past century. The village is one of the few in the UK awarded Fairtrade Village status for promoting fair trade and local produce. It gained this status on the 22nd of July 2003 and was the second village to do so. Cherry Burton has not always been called by this name. It was originally one of 8 Burtons in the East Riding, but became North Burton to distinguish it from the nearby village of South Burton. South Burton is now known as Bishop Burton. However, by the 17th century, the word North had changed to Cherry. In spite of some argument, it's now accepted that this was because of the large numbers of cherry trees which grew in the area. The village is mentioned in the Domesday Book as Burton, and at that time it belonged to the Archbishop of York. The name derives from a combination of Old and Middle English in 2 distinct parts. Burton means a fort enclosure or a farm with a palisade, whilst Cherry is quite obviously a cherry tree. As well as Cherry Burton and North Burton, the village was sometimes rarely known as Sheriff Burton. Historically, in the wapentake of Harthill, the village also came under Beverley for its local district. It has grown almost immeasurably over the last 60 years. Until some rapid house building in the 1960s and 1970s, the village mostly consisted of one long main street as laid down in the 18th and 19th centuries with farmhouses. By the end of the 18th century, life in the village was becoming more fully documented. Roads were beginning to improve, and with the sale of the manor to David Burton Fowler, the village of today started to take shape. By the 1830s, the old fields which had been farmed in strips were enclosed, and the fields, hedges and ditches, and also the wide road verges which can now be seen, were a part of Cherry Burton. A local man told me whilst I was here that back in the 1950s, Cherry Burton didn't even have any footpaths. The village's main street stretched along a line of wells running in an east to west direction, and at its western end were roads leading off it going to Eton and Bishop Burton. There were working farms along the main street, but this is no longer the case, and from a village whose roots lay firmly in agriculture, it's now mainly developed into a dormitory village for people who work in Beverley, Hull and nearby towns. So Cherry Burton is very different to this map you can see here on this notice board, because the main street, as you can see, that still exists, but all of this and all of this, there's no houses on this map, but there's houses on both sides of that main street now. That's probably why Cherry Burton is still defined as a linear village, even though it's not really linear anymore because you can walk around it in a circle like I'm doing. The housing developments came in stages. The first such development was the building of the Drive on the western end of the village in 1963. The Meadows development started in 1965, Canada Drive in 1967 and Highcroft in 1972. The old footfield and tennis courts were sold by the Borough Council developers in 1984, and in 1989 to 1990, Elm Tree Farmyard and part of a field between Canada Drive and the Eton Road developed, as was a field on the eastern side of the Bishop Burton Road. In 2018, a new footpath from the village to the old railway line opened, which allowed the inhabitants of Cherry Burton to access the Hudson Way, a foot and cycle path built on the formation of the old railway line. Speaking of the line, Cherry Burton was served by Cherry Burton Railway Station on the York to Beverley line between 1865 and 1959, with the station remaining open for another 5 years for the inward and outward transportation of agricultural produce. In 2011 and 2012, a flood alleviation scheme was implemented with funding from DEFRA. Like many other places in the East Riding of Yorkshire, Cherry Burton was subject to severe flooding in 2007. Let's talk demographics now. 99.4% of the residents here identify as white British citizens. In fact, the latest stats show only 9 people identified as anything else. 31.1% of the residents are aged over 65, meaning this is somewhat of an ageing community, despite the fact there are plenty of commuters that live here. That means there are very few children. Just 17% of Cherry Burton is made up of youngsters. The population density stands at 96.47. It should be noted that, in part, is down to the parish covering a lot of land out to the west, including Gardham and High Gardham. The average house in Cherry Burton goes onto the modern market for £335,000. The Bus Times website lists 6 buses for Cherry Burton, but the main one seems to be the 142 which runs to Beverley. You can get a bus to Hull from the nearby A1079. A Wesleyan Methodist chapel was built in 1824, followed by a primitive Wesleyan Methodist chapel in 1851. Both have ceased being used for worship. However, the Wesleyan chapel is still in use, and it's now used as the village hall, which holds live musical events and hosts an annual local pantomime. The village pub, the Bay Horse, holds events each week. TripAdvisor recommends it, saying it's a warm and welcoming village pub, serving great food and drink with a great service to match. The village has one main retail facility, and that's a cost-cutter shop, which also acts as a post office. The nearest supermarkets are located in Beverley. Once again, we come across a standalone postbox too, and that's next to the old red telephone box. It's been a while, but finally... The book exchanges are back. It seems such a long time in the East Riding since we found one that's been used for this purpose. Eton, remember, still had a working phone. The village has a primary school sited on the main street through the village. This has ties with the local church. Its latest rating by Ofsted was good. Here's Cedar Grange, which is a care home. It's obscured by trees, so I couldn't see much of it. The house was built as a rectory in 1878. St Michael and All Angels Church was also built in the village in the 1800s and is now Grade 2 listed. It was built on the site of a previous undated church. When the old church was pulled down, the present one was built at a cost of about £2,000. Somewhat unusually, for a village church at least, a clock was installed which has 4 faces. The church was open, so I went in for a look around. This has 3 bells which are now run electrically. The present organ was installed in 1899. The organ was built by Wordsworth & Co of Leeds. It has 2 full manuals and a separate pedal organ, and it cost £305. An electric blower was installed for the organ just after the Second World War, but the hand bellows still remain in place. Children are well looked after in this place. Along the main street you will find this small playground area. There's even an exercise field for your canine friends. You'll find this right at the end of the meadows, close to the sports field. Cherry Burton Parish Council do not allow dogs on the sports field in the interests of hygiene. Sports in the village include cricket, football, tennis and rounders. I'll tell you something, if you come to Cherry Burton, you know you're on the Yorkshire Wolds. It's quite a steep incline from the meadows to here at the pavilion, the playing field. And I'm out of breath a little bit now. There's a pavilion which has 3 changing rooms, a lounge and toilets here. The village cricket and football clubs both have junior sections. Apart from the church, a number of other buildings remain part of the village's heritage. Here's Cherry Burton Hall, built on the site of an earlier house next to the church, and it dates from 1794. Can you remember the Eckington episode in North East Derbyshire? If you can, here's an interesting pair of water pumps which were made at Renishaw Ironworks near Chesterfield. Now, in this part of the East Riding, you're never far away from a pond or two. You might remember the pond in Etton. Cherry Burton, Bishop Burton and Walkington all have these too. They're known as meres and are quite popular with the local ducks, but there are signs that forbid feeding them. Here's the Cherry Burton cross in the churchyard at St Michael and All Angels. The Village War Memorial, this was unveiled on the 8th of May 1920. And I thought it would be a nice idea to include the village sign as a landmark, seeing as it's a little more unusual than the ones we normally see in the East Riding. Okay, so I'm back on Highgate where I began my walk around Cherry Burton. Are we finished with Cherry Burton though? No way. Here comes the picture bit. That's the next thing for you in this episode. And there you have it, that's the parish of Cherry Burton, or at least what I discovered on my walk around. I was going to do a little drive around as well, but I figured there was no point because the things you've just seen in the picture bit have covered all the bits where I would have driven the car. And so for that reason, I'm heading for my next one, and it's the second of the 2 Burton twins. To the south, you'll find Bishop Burton, and that one is coming your way next Saturday. But for now, this has been the parish of Cherry Burton, and I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.